They laughed as the champagne dripped down his cheap shirt. They called him nobody. A joke. Someone who didn't belong. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know, was that the man standing there in those worn-out shoes, soaking wet and humiliated in front of hundreds of people, was the $4.7 billion investor who owned their entire company. And in less than 10 minutes, he was about to destroy their careers with just 5 words. 5 words that would change everything. But before I tell you what those words were, you need to hear how we got here. Because what happened that night, what happened when they realized who he really was, will leave you speechless. Trust me, you need to stay until the end for this one. Welcome to Reality Untold Stories. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. Section 1. The Grand Opening. You know, sometimes the most important lessons in life come from the moments when people think nobody's watching. When they believe their actions don't matter because the person in front of them doesn't matter. That's exactly what happened on one beautiful evening in downtown Chicago at the grand opening of Horizon Real Estate Group.
Picture this with me.
A massive hotel ballroom, the kind you see in movies. Crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, each one probably worth more than most people make in a year. Soft jazz music playing in the background. Tables covered in white silk, champagne flowing like water, and everywhere you looked, successful people. Business owners in their tailored suits. Real estate moguls in designer dresses. Photographers snapping pictures of everyone who looked important. This wasn't just any party. This was the official launch of Horizon Real Estate Group, a company that had been buying up properties all across the Midwest. Luxury apartments, shopping centers, office buildings. They were growing fast, making millions, and everyone wanted to be part of their success story. But here's where our story really begins. Standing near the back of the room, close to the service entrance, was a man who didn't quite fit in. While everyone else wore expensive clothes and sparkled with jewelry, this man wore simple blue jeans, a plain gray shirt that had seen better days, and old sneakers that were starting to fall apart. His name was Thomas. At least, that's what his name tag said. Thomas Miller. To everyone at that party, he looked like he worked there. Maybe part of the cleaning crew. Maybe someone who set up the chairs earlier. Nobody special. Nobody important. Just another face in the background that you don't really see. But what nobody in that room knew, what nobody could have possibly guessed, was that Thomas Miller was actually Thomas William Bradford. And Thomas William Bradford was worth $4.7 billion. That's billion with a B. He owned a private investment firm that funded companies all across the country. Real estate, technology, healthcare, you name it. He had his hands in everything. And Horizon Real Estate Group? He was their biggest silent investor. The man who had given them the money to grow, to expand, to become what they were celebrating that night. So why was he standing there in old jeans and worn-out shoes, looking like he didn't belong? Because Thomas had learned something important over his years in business. When you're rich and powerful and everyone knows it, people treat you differently. They smile at you. They agree with everything you say. They hide who they really are because they want something from you. But when people think you're nobody, when they believe you're just some random person who doesn't matter, that's when you see the truth. That's when people show you exactly who they are inside. Their real character. Their true heart. And Thomas needed to see the truth about the people running Horizon Real Estate Group before he invested another $30 million into their expansion plans. So there he stood, quietly watching, observing, learning. At the center of the party were the 2 founders of Horizon Real Estate Group. Their names were Victor and Natasha Kane, a married couple who loved the spotlight. Victor was tall, confident, always had a drink in his hand, and a loud laugh that filled the room. Natasha was stunning, the kind of woman who knew exactly how beautiful she was and used it to her advantage. They smiled for every camera. They hugged every important guest. They gave speeches about vision and success and changing the real estate industry. But Thomas had heard things. Whispers from people who worked for the company. Stories about how Victor and Natasha treated their employees. How they looked down on anyone they considered beneath them. How they would smile in public but say cruel things in private. Tonight, Thomas would see for himself if those stories were true. He took a small step forward, moving closer to the main area where all the guests were mingling. He picked up a glass of water from a side table and stood there, just watching, just waiting. And that's when Victor noticed him. Victor squinted across the room, his eyes landing on Thomas in his simple clothes and old shoes. He leaned over to Natasha and whispered something in her ear. She turned, looked at Thomas, and her face changed. The warm smile she had been wearing for the cameras disappeared, replaced by something cold. Something mean. Victor started walking toward Thomas, and Natasha followed close behind. Thomas took a quiet breath. He knew what was about to happen. He had seen it before in other companies, with other people who thought they were untouchable. The test was about to begin. Let me tell you what happened next, because this is where everything started to go wrong for Victor and Natasha, even though they didn't know it yet. Victor walked up to Thomas, with this look on his face. You know the look I'm talking about. The kind someone gives you when they think you're completely beneath them. When they've already decided you don't matter before you've even said a word. Excuse me, Victor said, his voice sharp and dismissive. I think you're in the wrong section. The staff entrance is in the back. Thomas looked at him calmly. I'm just standing here, he said quietly. I'm not bothering anyone. Natasha laughed. Not a real laugh. One of those fake, cruel laughs that's meant to embarrass someone. Victor, look at his shoes. Do you think he's lost? Maybe he wandered in from the street. A few people nearby turned to look. Some of them started to smile, enjoying the show. This is the thing about people sometimes. When someone powerful starts to mock someone they think is powerless, others join in. Not because they're bad people necessarily, but because they want to be on the winning side. They want to be part of the inside joke. Thomas felt his face grow warm, but he didn't move. He didn't argue. He just stood there, watching Victor and Natasha, seeing exactly who they were. I'm sorry, Thomas said simply. I'll move if you'd like. That would be great, Victor said, waving his hand like he was shooing away a dog. This area is for investors and VIP guests only. You understand. Thomas nodded and started to step aside. He was about to walk away, let it go, observe from somewhere else. But then Victor did something that changed everything. Victor was holding a glass of champagne. Expensive champagne, the kind that costs more than most people spend on groceries in a month. And as Thomas moved past him, Victor accidentally bumped into him. The champagne spilled all over Thomas's shirt, soaking through the fabric, dripping down onto his jeans. The room went quiet for just a second. Then came the gasps, the whispers, and worst of all, the laughter. Someone pulled out their phone and started recording. Then another person. Then another. Within seconds, multiple cameras were pointed at Thomas, standing there with champagne dripping off his clothes, looking like someone who had just been humiliated in front of hundreds of people. Oh no, Natasha said, her hand covering her mouth in fake concern. What a mess. Victor, we should get someone to clean this up. Where's the cleaning staff when you need them? She looked directly at Thomas. Oh wait, maybe you could help with that? You look like you'd be good at cleaning up messes. More laughter. More phones recording. More people joining in on the mockery. Thomas looked down at his ruined shirt. He could feel the sticky liquid soaking through to his skin. He could hear the laughter, see the smirking faces, feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on him. But here's what's important. In that moment, Thomas wasn't angry. He was sad. Deeply, genuinely sad. Because he had hoped, somewhere in his heart, that the stories he'd heard about Victor and Natasha weren't completely true. He had hoped that maybe people had exaggerated. Maybe they weren't really that cruel. But now he knew. Now he had seen it with his own eyes. These were the people running a company he had invested millions into. These were the people who would be in charge of his next $30 million investment. These were the people he had trusted. And they had just revealed exactly who they were. Just when Thomas was about to walk away, to leave and process what had happened, something unexpected occurred. A young woman came rushing over from the side of the room. She couldn't have been more than 25 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and an expression of genuine concern on her face. She was carrying napkins, lots of them, and she came straight to Thomas. "Sir, I'm so sorry," she said softly, starting to help dab at the champagne on his shirt. Please, let me help you. That was completely unfair. Thomas looked at her, surprised. You don't have to do that, he said. I know, she replied, meeting his eyes. But it's the right thing to do. Nobody deserves to be treated like that. Her name was Riley, and in that simple act of kindness, she had just changed her entire future. She just didn't know it yet. Section 3. The Truth Revealed, 800 Words. Riley continued helping Thomas, ignoring the stares and whispers around them. Victor and Natasha had already turned away, moving on to their next conversation, their next important guest, already forgetting about the man they had just humiliated. To them, Thomas was nobody. A brief moment of entertainment. Not worth another thought. But Thomas wouldn't forget. And neither would Riley. Thank you, Thomas said quietly as Riley handed him more napkins. That's very kind of you. Riley shook her head. It's nothing. I just hate seeing people treated that way. Especially by them. She glanced toward Victor and Natasha, then quickly looked away, as if afraid they might see her. You work here? Thomas asked. For the company, yes. I'm in the accounting department. Entry level. I mostly process invoices and handle expense reports. Nothing fancy. She gave a small, sad smile. Actually, I almost didn't come tonight. They told all the lower-level employees we had to attend to make the party look more full, but they also made it clear we should stay in the background. Don't mingle with the important guests. Don't draw attention to ourselves. Thomas felt his heart sink even further. And yet you came over to help me. Well, Riley said, finishing with the napkins, some things are more important than keeping your head down. My mom always taught me that how you treat people when nobody's watching says everything about who you are. And everyone was watching them humiliate you, and nobody did anything. That didn't sit right with me. Thomas studied her face. She meant every word. This wasn't someone trying to impress anyone or gain anything. This was genuine kindness. The real thing. It was rare, especially in places like this. Can I ask you something? Thomas said. What do you think of this company? Honestly. Riley hesitated. I probably shouldn't say. Please. I'd really like to know. She took a breath. Honestly, the company does good work. We really do help people find homes and build communities. But Victor and Natasha, they've changed over the past year. Ever since the money started really flowing in, they've become different. Harder. Meaner. They fired 3 people last month just because those people questioned some of their decisions. Good people who cared about doing things right. And they treat most of the staff like we're invisible unless they need something from us. Thomas nodded slowly. Everything Riley said matched what he had heard. And now he had seen it himself. I'm sorry you have to work in that environment, he said sincerely. Riley shrugged. It's okay. I'm saving money to go back to school. Get my MBA. Maybe start my own business someday, something where people actually matter. Where success doesn't mean forgetting how to be human. Before Thomas could respond, the lights in the ballroom dimmed slightly and someone tapped a microphone at the front of the room. Ladies and gentlemen, a woman's voice called out. It was Patricia Chun, the event coordinator. If I could have everyone's attention, please. We have a very special guest arriving. Someone who has made all of this possible. Someone whose investment and belief in Horizon Real Estate Group has allowed us to grow beyond our wildest dreams. The room buzzed with excitement. Whispers spread like wildfire. Is it him? I heard he never shows up to these things. Nobody even knows what he looks like. Victor and Natasha moved to the front of the room, huge smiles on their faces, ready to greet their mysterious benefactor. They had been trying to meet Thomas William Bradford in person for over a year, but he had always declined, always sent representatives instead. If he was finally here tonight, this would be the biggest moment of their careers. Patricia continued, Please join me in welcoming the founder and CEO of Bradford Investment Group, our largest investor and partner, Mr. Thomas William Bradford. The room turned toward the main entrance. Cameras raised. Everyone waited to see who would walk through those doors. But nobody came through the doors. Instead, Thomas, standing near the back in his stained shirt and old jeans, took a step forward into the light. Riley gasped beside him. Her hand went to her mouth. Patricia's eyes scanned the room, confused. Where was he? Thomas cleared his throat and spoke, his voice calm but carrying across the now silent ballroom. I'm already here. Every head turned. Every eye found him. Victor squinted, confused. Natasha's smile faltered. And then understanding slowly, painfully, began to dawn on their faces. The man they had mocked. The man they had humiliated. The man they had poured champagne on and laughed at in front of hundreds of people. That man was the billionaire who held their future in his hands. I want you to imagine the silence that filled that room. Have you ever been in a place where hundreds of people suddenly stop talking all at once? Where you could hear a pin drop? Where the air itself feels heavy with shock? That's what it was like. Thomas walked slowly toward the front of the room, his champagne-stained shirt visible under the lights. Riley stood frozen where he had left her, her eyes wide, her hand still over her mouth in disbelief. Victor and Natasha stood on the small stage at the front, their faces going through every emotion you can imagine. Confusion, disbelief, recognition. And then, slowly, creeping in like cold water, absolute horror. No, Natasha whispered, but her microphone was still on, so everyone heard it. That's not possible. Patricia, the event coordinator, rushed forward with a tablet, showing them something on the screen. Probably a photograph of Thomas William Bradford from some business database. Victor looked at the screen, looked at Thomas, looked back at the screen. His face went pale. The color literally drained right out of his skin. Thomas reached the stage and stepped up. Someone handed him a microphone, their hands shaking as they did. Good evening, Thomas said calmly. I apologize for my appearance. As you can see, I had a little accident with some champagne earlier. A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd, but mostly people just stared. Thomas continued, I want to start by saying thank you to everyone who came tonight to celebrate Horizon Real Estate Group. This company has accomplished remarkable things in a short time. You've built beautiful homes, created communities, provided opportunities. Victor and Natasha started to relax slightly. Maybe this would be okay. Maybe he would just give a speech and leave. Maybe they could explain, apologize later in private. But then Thomas's voice changed. It became softer, but somehow more powerful. I'm going to tell you all something that might surprise you. I don't usually attend these events in person. I prefer to stay behind the scenes, let my investments speak for themselves. But tonight I decided to come in disguise. I dressed in simple clothes. I introduced myself as Thomas Miller. I wanted to see something important. The room was absolutely silent now. Every person hanging on every word. I wanted to see the true heart of this company. Not the heart it shows to cameras and investors. Not the polished version it presents to the world. But the real heart. The way it treats people when it thinks nobody important is watching. Victor's hands started to shake. Natasha closed her eyes. And what I saw tonight, Thomas said, his voice filled with quiet sadness, broke my heart. I watched the founders of this company, people I invested millions of dollars in, people I believed in, mock and humiliate someone they thought was powerless. They poured champagne on me. They laughed. They encouraged others to laugh. And they did it without a second thought, because they believed I was nobody. You could hear crying now. Several people in the audience were actually crying, whether from embarrassment or shame or just the emotional weight of what was happening. Thomas turned to look at Victor and Natasha directly. You poured champagne on me tonight, but what you really poured away was trust, integrity, decency, everything that actually matters in business and in life. Thomas, please, Victor started, his voice breaking. We didn't know. We would never. You would never do it to someone important, Thomas interrupted. That's the problem. That's exactly the problem. You think respect is something you only give to people who can do something for you. But that's not respect. That's just fear. Real respect is what you give to everyone, regardless of who they are or what they can give you in return. He paused, letting those words sink in. Then he turned to look at Riley, still standing near the back of the room, looking absolutely terrified. There was one person tonight who showed real character, Thomas said, pointing toward her. Riley, could you come up here, please? Riley shook her head, but people nearby gently encouraged her forward. She walked slowly to the stage, looking like she might faint at any moment. Thomas smiled at her warmly. This young woman saw someone in trouble and helped without hesitation. She showed kindness when everyone else showed cruelty. She treated me like a human being when others treated me like garbage. He turned back to the crowd. Riley works in your accounting department. Entry level. And starting Monday, she will be promoted to Director of Company Culture, reporting directly to me. She will help rebuild what has been lost here. Riley's legs nearly gave out. Someone brought her a chair. But Thomas wasn't finished yet. Thomas stood there on that stage, holding the microphone, looking out at hundreds of faces. Some were ashamed. Some were curious. Some were still in complete shock. But everyone was listening now. Really listening. I want to share something with all of you, Thomas said, his voice gentle but firm. Something I learned many years ago when I was just starting out in business. I wasn't always wealthy. I grew up in a small town in Ohio. My father was a factory worker. My mother cleaned houses. We didn't have much money, but we had something more valuable. We had dignity. And my parents taught me that every single person you meet deserves respect. Not because of what they own or what they do for a living, but because they're human. Because they matter. He paused, looking down at his stained shirt, then back up at the audience. Over the years, I've invested in dozens of companies. I've made some people very rich. I've helped build businesses from the ground up. And do you know what I've learned? The most successful companies aren't the ones with the smartest strategies or the best products. They're the companies where people actually care about each other, where kindness matters, where respect flows in every direction, not just up the ladder of success. Several people in the audience were nodding now. Others were wiping tears from their eyes. Thomas turned to Victor and Natasha, who stood frozen on the stage beside him. I came here tonight prepared to invest another $30 million into Horizon Real Estate Group. $30 million to expand into 5 new cities. To hire hundreds of new employees. To build thousands of new homes. Victor's eyes lit up with desperate hope. But I can't do that now, Thomas continued quietly. I can't invest that money knowing it would be managed by people who treat others the way you treated me tonight. And it's not just about revenge or punishment. It's about values. It's about what kind of businesses I want to build in this world. Please, Natasha said, tears streaming down her face now. Please, Thomas. We'll change. We'll do better. You'll be removed from leadership positions effective immediately, Thomas said, his voice sad but certain. Your contracts will be bought out. You'll receive what you're legally owed. But you will no longer run this company. The board of directors will meet tomorrow to appoint new leadership. People who understand that success without humanity is just an expensive form of failure. Victor's legs gave out. He sat down hard on the edge of the stage, his head in his hands. The room erupted in whispers. Cameras flashed. People pulled out their phones to text, to call, to share what was happening. Thomas raised his hand, asking for quiet one more time. I want to end with something important, he said. To everyone watching, everyone here tonight. What happened tonight isn't just about Victor and Natasha. It's a reminder for all of us. Every day, we make choices about how we treat people. The server at the restaurant. The person cleaning our office. The young employee who's just starting out. We choose in those moments who we want to be. He looked directly into the camera that was recording the event. Choose kindness. Not because someone might be secretly important. Not because you might get caught. But because it's right. Because every person you meet is fighting battles you know nothing about. Because at the end of our lives, nobody remembers how much money we made or how many companies we built. They remember how we made them feel. They remember if we were kind. Thomas set down the microphone and walked over to Riley, who was still sitting in the chair, absolutely overwhelmed by everything happening. Are you okay? he asked softly, away from the microphone now. She nodded, tears running down her cheeks. I just helped someone. I didn't think, I never imagined. That's exactly why it mattered, Thomas said. You didn't help me because you knew who I was. You helped me because it was the right thing to do. That's who you are. And that's the kind of person I want helping lead this company forward. He helped her stand, and together they walked toward the exit. Behind them, the party dissolved into chaos. Victor and Natasha remained on the stage, their entire world crumbling around them. Security guards were already moving in, prepared to escort them out of their own company. As Thomas and Riley reached the door, she turned to him. Can I ask you something? Of course. When they poured that champagne on you, when they laughed at you, weren't you angry? Didn't you want to tell them right then who you were? Thomas smiled. I was sad more than angry. But no, I didn't want to reveal myself right away. Because I needed to see what happened next. I needed to see if anyone would choose kindness when there was nothing to gain from it. And you did. That told me everything I needed to know. They stepped out into the cool Chicago night. Behind them, through the windows, they could see the party completely falling apart. But Thomas didn't look back. He had seen enough. Come on, he said to Riley. We have a lot of work to do. We have a company to rebuild. The right way this time. And as they walked away together, Thomas thought about something his mother had told him when he was young, working his first job, dealing with his first cruel boss. Remember, Tommy, she had said, how you treat people when they can't do anything for you shows exactly who you are inside. And who you are inside is all that really matters in the end. She was right then. She was still right now. And that truth, that simple truth, had just cost two people everything. Because in the end, kindness is never wasted. And cruelty always comes with a price. The end.